Hello again, everyone, and welcome to One-on-One. I'm Martin False. And for years, I've been sitting, and across the table, we get a guest, and they give us their story. But I have to admit, you see me a lot of times. I don't have a lot of notes. Pride myself on remembering a lot of things. But when we come back from the break, our guest today has a resume so big, you have to cheat a little bit. I have to be honest with you. And he has roots in Louisiana. He has roots here in South Louisiana, and I'm not going to give you his name. You're going to have to stick around, and after the break, you're going to have to find out exactly who I'm talking about. But he continues to help the military grow. He's been a big part of it, and he will be my guest on One-on-One. Don't go away. One-on-One is brought to you by the Law Office of Waits and Downer. We all know aviation's changed so much. I mean, when my daddy was on the Bennington, the planes were changing during his tour. I mean, fold up wing planes to the jets to different things. But on the submarine side, or the unmanned submarine, that was a big evolution to where it is today. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think the big thing is, like in sub-school, part of the deal was we still had diesel boats on the waterfront. We'd actually go to sea for a day. They would rotate you around various stations, as we would say, on the submarine. So I got to see what was World War II about. And of course, during World War II, we got the SJ radar, which was new to a submarine. The Japanese never had that. The Germans never had that. But at the same time, after the war, we didn't have a snorkel. So we got a hold of a lot of their submarines after the war, and we immediately incorporated a snorkel, which allows you to run a diesel engine and charge your batteries while you're just at what we would call periscope depth. Mm-hmm. So I watched the evolution of that, the moving away from everything analog to everything digital, to all these periscopes coming through the hull, to now with the Virginia class, we have no penetrations but cables, and instead of having to be right under the periscope area, we can now move control room one deck down. Mm-hmm. And instead of one individual on the periscope today, with the photonic mast, we can put what we're seeing through the periscope to everybody. Mm-hmm. And the control room. So you have more eyes on what's going on outside that. And then we've gone from handles to, it looks like a game controller, a joystick yeah. that junior officers who are in the control room running things, and they're at periscope that actually use.
They're playing a game, although it isn't a game.
It's a serious game.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So yeah, the transition for the submarine community has been tremendous. The big thing is that we're not putting the amount of dollars that we should be putting into generally defense, and especially the submarine community. We've really dropped down in the number of submarines, and we need to build that back up.
Well, what about the robotics side of the submarines? I have a friend I graduated with, Bobby Chris, who dealt with robotic submarines and all, but that's all Greek to me. So can you give me a little lesson on that?
Mostly the submarines, and when you talk about robotics, you're really talking about Tomahawk missiles that we initially could only shoot through a torpedo tube. But now on the Virginia class, we started with vertical tubes on the bow. Mm-hmm. And this newest class, Virginia, we're actually adding more vertical tubes in the midsection.
How many can you put on one? 20? Does it vary?
Yeah, it varies in the configuration, because whatever the max is, like if you look at the converted Ohio ballistic missile submarines, mm-hmm. There are 4 of them that we converted to hold Tomahawk missiles in those mm-hmm. tubes, and they could hold up to 192.
Wow.
And that configuration, and much less, and what we call the fast attack. And I was mainly on fast attacks, except for when I was ashore up in Bangor, Washington, where the Trident submarines are refitted and sent back to sea. So those were what I would call the early day robotics. Now we're getting into where we can now launch through our 3-inch signal ejector an actual drone. It's small, but you can launch that up. It'll break the water and then launch itself. And now you communicate with it by one of the antennas on board that you stick up above the waterline, control it, send it ashore, reconnoiter it, and ditch it in the water. Now they're getting ready to put them in the same tubes as the big Tomahawk missile. So it's going to be an even bigger robot. And now we have a whole set of large unmanned vehicles. So my 25-member team now is 75, 100 and growing. They're now going to spin up another unit on the East Coast. And now we're getting really big, long robotic underwater vehicles that can go out for weeks at a time, independent, and do all the things you would expect it to do.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. Sometimes you hear how our military has been caught up with by other nations. Do we still have superiority?
I believe so. The submarine community has always been out in front. We always look to see what the other nations are doing. Mm-hmm. We try to keep up with that. So we know where we want to be and how far out in front we have to be to dominate that battle space. We're off of Yemen. They're firing at our ships. We hold back a lot of our technology, don't we, until that time will come where you really need it. I think that's a good point that you bring up about what's going on in the Far East right now when it comes to drones, unmanned aircraft system, officially called. And I think what we're discovering is, does it make a lot of sense to use a $2 million missile to take down a $20,000 drone? I think that's the new game that maybe we were a little bit on our back foot about. We were working in that. I don't think we were putting nearly enough research and development dollars into that, but I think we've awakened to that challenge. I think across the Department of Defense, not just the Navy, everybody. And so we're all struggling to find an answer, and now we're trying to put new contracts out that'll move quicker to bring this technology into the military and deploy it. Because normally, if you take an average aircraft, it takes almost 15 years from design to build to certification to integration before it's really a frontline aircraft ready to fight. We sort of overkicked our coverage with these things. Don't you have to sometimes go back to simplicity? Yeah. All of our adversaries, they don't have, the technology we have. Mm-hmm. So they're always looking for a chink in our armor at the lowest cost possible. And I think we've got to rethink some of how we go about defending ourselves. Yeah, in other words, let's shoot 400 drones at Israel, and maybe 10 of them get through. Well, I think that was a great example, is when Iran shot hundreds of drones and missiles, and through the coordination of Israel, the U.S., and even some of the Far Eastern countries, coordinated it, but we sent up a very expensive shield to take down all this technology. So clearly we have technology superiority. It comes down to, dollars. Can we keep, it's like you've got a 6-shooter. We just shot 2 bullets. I only have, a couple of them left, and yet the enemy's still coming at me. So we've got to adjust how we take on these new technologies. And I know we're working hard at it, but it's how quick can we deploy it and put it in the enlisted man's hand.
A lot of your talks, we sent a camera to cover some of the things you were doing when you came down recently, but you see the young generation coming in. And I know I'm becoming old enough to say, who that young generation, sometimes they tough, they're challenging. But they have some things to offer too. You just got to tap into it. So how does a guy like you, when you're talking to young enlisted men, how do you relate to them?
I think in all of us, there's, a want and a need to accomplish something. I think that's human nature. And it's how do you reach in and tap that point. And I see most of them lack confidence. They really are capable, but they don't have confidence to take on the next challenge. And they seem to want to hold back. So the first thing, you try to work with them on is it's important just to show up. That's half the battle. The next thing is, the old saying, there's no I in team. And then how do you inculcate into them that spirit of what, working together as a team can produce so much more than just a single individual. And you got to remember, they grew up in a time where you sat on the sofa with a game controller and you could be playing with your friend down the street or somebody across the nation and having a conversation at the same time. So they are in a much more cloistered environment. So you got to break them out of that shell a little bit. And I find if you give them small challenges to begin with and they get to accomplish that in a short amount of time, gives them that confidence to take on a little bit bigger roles. So that's how I try to approach it. Is that there are some always who will sit at the front, and those you don't have to challenge so much. It's how do you get to the middle and the folks who want to sit in the back of the room.
With this kind of career, you were pretty busy. How'd you work in a family and all?
One, to have a great Navy wife. I couldn't. My wife Atlas is she's kept me stable and on course. Told me to go out and do the things I've got to do. Don't worry about the family. Yeah. And when you're deployed, everything's on their shoulders. So I think the military family doesn't get near the praise that they should for the sacrifices they make so I can have this career of mine.
How many children do you have?
I have 2 children. They're all grown with their own children now.
Any military?
No, like my son told me, he said, Dad, I was in the military with you. I want to do something different. So they've all struck in different ways. My son is into cybersecurity and doing well there. And my daughter and her husband have a company that they do a lot of engineering work, and she's in contracts and cybersecurity. So yeah, they're busy folks as well. So it's all about my wife. She's the center of the family. She's who I lean on, and without her, I would never have accomplished any of those things.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. What did you do for fun?
The big thing for me is, early days it was running hard, having a good time. Came back from Japan. I was over in Japan and got married and immediately swept my wife off to Japan. Yeah. But when we got back to the States, I started getting interested in woodworking. Okay. And so slowly built up my tool chest, so to speak, started getting some machines. And then one of my best friend, Jim, was a great woodworker. He and I got together, and he really took what little skill set I had and took me up to a whole nother level. So we would do projects in his house, projects in my house. So We've built cabinetries, furniture, you name it. We've done it. So that's been one of my outlets, is reading about woodworking and doing projects.
That Jim felt pretty proud that he's teaching somebody who's built battleships and submarines and aviation, and he's teaching you how to do woodwork.
Yeah, I met Jim back in my enlisted days here. There's not too many submarines in New Orleans, and I wanted a tour down home, so you had to go into recruiting. So when I got into recruiting, I got assigned to the Chief of Naval Reserves, which was at the time down on Poland and Dauphine in New Orleans at the old port there. And it was run by a 3-star by the name of Admiral Charbonnet. And so I worked for a captain after school. You go through a school process. Instead of going into the field, at that time I was taking night courses from Tulane on computer science. We call it ADP back in the day, automatic data processing, but it's IT work. And they saw what I was doing, and instead of sending me to the field to recruit, they kept me on the staff to help them develop a IT program, which they did not have at the time. And one of the contractors I was assigned to work with was Jim and his company. And it was through that relationship we got to know each other. Learned he was into woodworking like I was, but he was at a different skill level. So it was through that great friendship, and to this day, that we work together.
We forget about the Higgins boat built in Louisiana.
And that's great. You can go down to the World War II Museum, and as soon as you walk in, there's a Higgins boat staring you in the face. And in fact, my father-in-law, he worked at Higgins, making the landing craft and the PT boats.
I had an uncle and 2 aunts. The ladies welded too.
The women had to come into the workforce like never before, and they too learned a whole new set of skills.
If I went to Mr. Gary Schwess or any of the Schwess family, and I went to Jim or went to your family and I said, what's the one word that would describe you? I know your first name's Rafael, but you go by George. What's the one word that would describe George? And I'll say, Mr. George, out of respect. What would you hope it would be?
What comes to mind, because I've been told this by lots of folks, is tenacious. Once I decide to do something and do it well, you have to have the tenacity to see it through. And then part of that tenaciousness, I would like to think, is loyalty to friends and colleagues. Lastly, love for my family. Love them dearly. They're the best of me. And without them, I wouldn't be sitting at this table today.
And I'll add one, love of your country, loyal to your country.
Yes, sir.
So amen for that.
No doubt.
Without people like you, we'd be in trouble.
Yes, sir.
But thank you so much for joining us. It's been an honor, and I appreciate sitting across the table from a guy like you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the time, too, sir.
Anytime. Thank you. For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. This one-on-one program has been brought to you by the law offices of Waits and Downer.